What you do is always go behind low.
This is week 4 of our Lenten series. On the road, those on beat. This is a
Bob Dylan song.
Really? I was going to say Elvis Crosby, but that probably dates me. We are thrilled to have back, despite our best efforts, Bishop Mark and Reverend Helen, and as they share with us their journey so far. I know that Sharon wants to say one more time she didn't have everyone's attention. Sharon? No, it's like a teacher that always looks at the back of the class. You want to say something about the bottles?
Yes. For those who I haven't mentioned it to, empty bottles for water go right in the back, in the box.
Right up there.
Yes. Thank you.
Any other introduction? I thought Mark was somewhere else. Where is that?
Camp Allen.
Camp Allen in Texas. Texas. Where it always rains and it's never Christmas. No, it's always winter and never Christmas. Where there is no rain.
Is that right?
What is the bishop, the other bishop has to say? He's just underwater. In over his head. So we are thrilled to have them back in. Tell me when you're ready and I'll turn off some lights.
Yeah, tonight carrying on. Do I need to use the microphone?
It doesn't, it never hurts.
It never hurts.
Is this the one?
Yes.
How does the song by Bob Dylan go?
I want to be in Mozambique.
I want to be in those
You don't want me to sing it. It makes Dylan sound good.
My former church looked a lot like, and he was a musician, he looked like Bob Dylan. And his mother said, and he sings better too.
Good evening again. We're carrying on from last week where Mark really led our evening talking about history and government and stuff like that about Mozambique, and moving into what we actually did there. And we're grouping it all under the title of mission. So I'm starting with a prayer for mission, the mission of the church, before Mark carries on. O God, you have made of one blood all the peoples of the earth, and sent your blessed Son to preach peace to those who are far off, and to those who are near. Grant that people everywhere may seek after you and find you. Bring the nations into your fold. Pour out your Spirit upon all flesh, and hasten the coming of your kingdom. Through Jesus Christ our Lord, who lives and reigns with you in the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen.
Yeah, today we're going to talk a bit more about mission. And I remember my first gathering of the bishops, the House of Bishops, was called the Synod of Bishops in Southern Africa. And there was a tall, quite stern-looking bishop, all in black, taller even than I was, and a very severe kind of look on his face. So I asked one of the other ones, what's his name? It says Bishop John of St. Helena, the island of St. Helena, where Napoleon was imprisoned. That's about the only thing it was good for, because it's really in the middle of nowhere, halfway between Africa and South America. And there are no airplanes, there's no airstrip, so you have to take a ship, which takes like 5 or 6 days to get there. Only comes once every 6 weeks. So when the bishop goes away from the diocese, he's away for a long time. And so I'd introduced myself, and I said, Bishop, so how many parishes and priests do you have in the Diocese of St. Helena? He said, let me think. I can't do it. He had a real strong British, proper British accent, not a plain one like Helen. With plums in your mouth, you know, the proper way to speak. And he says, let me think. 3. Oh no, 2. He had 3 parishes and 2 priests. He had a lot of work to do in mission. From there, you can only build up. So that's a good place to start. And last week, we just started on these slides about saying the beginning of our journey into mission came from this vision that we work together to become a communion of communities transformed in Christ Jesus. And what that meant to us in Mozambique was all about relationships. That's one of the great strengths of Africa that we learned, is that life is all about relationships. I think we said in one of the weeks about Ubuntu, this philosophy of I am because we are. Our very existence depends on each other. And so we developed this relational and dynamic view of our life together as church, which had a big impact because it wasn't so much what we did, but who we were. And I think that's a really important place to start, because who you are determines what you're going to do, your character, the values that you have as an individual as well as a community. And so we divided our life together as a church in these 3 areas of relationship. Worship was our relationship to God. In relationship to God. Ministry was our relationship to one another within the church. And so it was all the different programs that we had in the church, from Sunday school to youth, to the Women's Guild, all the things we did together as members of the church. And mission was our relationship, to use the biblical language, to the world. So everyone who was outside. And of course, that's a huge dimension. But again, try to think about it as we talk about what we did and what happened to us in that terms of relationship, not just in the terms of activities, although there were plenty of activities. It was the relationship between us as members of Christ's body and the world. And then we had these 4 kind of pillars which were important to us in the local area. All-member ministry. We came from a very Anglo-Catholic tradition in northern Mozambique, where Father knew best. And everything came and went through the priest.
They may not know what Anglo-Catholic tradition means.
Oh, okay.
They may, but they may not.
It's a high church tradition, Anglo-Catholic, Anglican, Episcopalian, and Catholic, Roman. So it was the Oxford movement, led by John Henry Newman, that. You want to say something? I could tell. I could just feel it. Part of Helen's studies. Speak.
John Henry Newman was one of the leaders, but it was a time in the middle of the 19th century when the evangelical part of our church had started to take off, and there was a move, a bunch of people trying to move back to Catholic, to to the Catholic way of doing things, which was aesthetically, it was aesthetic worship, so everything, high altars, literally high altars, very much robed priests and bishops. Newman is known for saying something like, magnify your position, you know, which I hated. But it's what he wanted, you know, with all your robes, do that. But actually, I have read quite a bit of his stuff now, and I can see that it was something very visible, that going to a new place with high literacy or no literacy, a new place, it was exciting. And we'll show you a picture later of our, or did we show that also? Of our cathedral, and you'll see that it was long and skinny, and that was partly fitting in with the whole theology that they brought out, because God was distant, God was high, there was lots of bells and incense.
The altar was about 8 feet high. I mean, the stage for it.
The emphasis on the sacraments
Yes.
and worship.
John Henry Newman talked about the echo of God in our worship. So there was an echo, meaning you can't quite see it, you can't quite grasp it, but it's there. The presence of God is there.
And there's a story I never dared tell in Bishop Mike's presence. I didn't give him the wrong idea, but on my first Episcopal visit, it was up the lake shore, and we were in this rowboat, I think we mentioned. A rowboat made for 8 with about 26 people in it. 4 goats, 3 sheep, and 20 chickens. And we were all sitting like this little outboard motor, a little 6 horsepower outboard motor to go 95 miles up the lake shore. We were sore. But when we arrived in the first place, and you know, all the people had come to the shore, beautiful sandy beach, hundreds of people, you know, children everywhere. So anytime there's an event, children show up, hundreds. So several hundred people, and you know, you can't be very graceful stepping out in one of these boats with your trousers rolled up to your knees and your shoes in your hand. And I step off in the thing, and everybody gets on their knees. 300 people kneel down in front of me. And I just said, what have I got myself? And I didn't dare look to her. I didn't dare. But that's part of this tradition. There was great respect for those who were ordained in God's church. And the missionaries that went out took vows of poverty, obedience, and celibacy. The university's Michigan missions to Central Africa that started our diocese were all celibate. Anglicans, Episcopalians, but a very, very Catholic tradition in that sense.
And that was, this high church tradition was uniformly what the Anglican Church took to the English colonies in Africa in the 19th century. Is that generally the case?
Not uniformly around the world, but to Southern Africa. Southern Africa is high church.
But our neighbors in Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda would be evangelical, or as they say, they're low church.
Have you heard about the 2 mission agencies, USPG, United Society for the Propagation of the Gospel, and CMS, Church Mission Society. USPG is the high church one, and well, it's very muddled up now, but and then CMS, the more evangelical. Yeah. But robes and all that it fits African society to have that, and I think it really, the big man image that you get in Uganda as well comes from that whole thing. But it died out. This was a movement that died out quite quickly, I think in the 1860s in Britain. Because actually Newman started writing as if we should join the Catholic Church again, and that wasn't what they'd expected. So it kind of died out when he moved over to the Catholic Church, and but they carried on with this mission because the UNCA, which was the mission that went to this part of the world, came out of that movement. And I heard that bishops in the UK weren't ordaining them because they were worried about this new movement. So all they could do really was go somewhere else. And they started working before going somewhere else, before the UMCA was established. They started to work with the very poor in urban Britain, and then went out there. And lots of women went out as well. If you read anything about mission in that time, then there wasn't very much for women to do to express their faith and their desire to serve Christ and the church, but go overseas. And there's great stories about the women that went out there. And I've known some of them personally as well. And they were great examples to the women. A very strange thing, I've been told that this mission group that went out there actually went against a cultural norm there in traditional religion, in that women were just as involved as men as leaders in worship in traditional religion. It didn't matter. I remember our dean saying to me when I first went that it didn't matter who was at the altar, male or female, because that's what they were used to. But the church went out there and they changed all that. They made it men leading. And the women, I've heard that the Mothers' Union, which I told you about a couple of weeks ago, actually filled the sort of gap for women to still be part of leadership in their communities in this new religion, because they were being taught about marriage and family life from the Christian perspective and all the incoming culture, and they could still carry on being what they were before, leaders in their communities in that way. Very interesting history. So that it's been very difficult. There are very few dioceses that were born out of the UMCA that have women ordained in them, and there were 26 dioceses that came out of this UMCA mission that went up to the area around the lake shore. 26 dioceses, and very few of them have got women even now in them. You think we're the only ones, and there were only 2 in our diocese, apart from me. Strange.
That was a bit of a story into a story, but the idea that all members are ministers was revolutionary in our context. And yet, as you'll see as we go through the slides, it was happening. People were involved in all sorts of mission and ministry work already, but there was this model of what church meant in people's minds. And so it was kind of breaking open that and giving authority and space for people to do what they were doing and authorizing it. Yeah. And then the other, just to quickly say, servant leadership was particularly for us as clergy to try to get away from this, eu sou padre, eu sou bispo, I am the priest, I am the bishop, and try to get to more of a Christ-like servant attitude. This was also a counterculture that after 15 years, sometimes we still scratched our head and not sure that we made an indentation in that. There was a lot of prestige offered to clergy, which I think is a wonderful thing, but it quickly can go to your head if you don't have a strong person to keep you honest. PCCs is a Portuguese acronym for Pequena Comunidade Cristã, small Christian communities, and it's really a liberation theology idea from South America and Central America, where these small Christian communities became places to study the scriptures together in groups, and then be missionaries in your own little biro and community. And we'll talk more about that as we go through. Want to say something about that?
Absolutely. This is 2 years ago, Palm Sunday, in my church there. And I want to introduce you to St. Agnes, which are these girls. They are actually a kind of offshoot of the Mothers' Union, and they're very big around Malawi, around the lakeshore. And it's a group of girls from the age of around 9, although we had 6-year-olds in it as well. Who's a 6-year-old. Through to about 16, 17, 18, perfect age to be speaking to young girls about family, about church, about their faith and everything. Taken very, very seriously, and they're involved in liturgy. Here they're bringing up the elements. Look at how many there are. I think in this one church we had, well, I do know, we had 54 in my church. But it was just something that the Mothers Union would then look after, so they were very involved with the women of the church too. And Palm Sunday, just full of heart. You can see everyone's even outside the church. But we paraded through the streets from the middle of town, which is maybe 2 miles away. Every year it was just more and more people, but possibly 2,000-3,000 people with palms like that, walking through the street. They came to this church because we just built this, it was big enough to take them. But previous years we'd actually met in this basketball stadium in the middle of town. But it was a big buzz for everyone, and it was just a fun thing. So vibrant worship. There is never a service when people are sat still. There is never a service when there is not a lot of singing and different groups participating. There is never a service when there was not singing. You never just did normal mass, misa, spoken. It would always be sung, even if it was less that you were singing in it. Very active and very lively, and to be in the middle of that makes you feel like the church is actually moving with the activity. Every member ministry of the baptized. I learned the importance of baptism, I think, from the community perspective. I don't know if they truly understood the enormity of the theology, but it's so important to have your child baptized. And I think I said last week, the weekend before we left, in this church, we had another 70 babies baptized, and that was maybe the 3rd time that year. It was just a community experience of everybody bringing their newly born babies there. I had to watch people because they would bring them from other towns or whatever, so it's got to be from here. But it's tiring, it's exhausting ministry trying to baptize that number, and I would be very bossy about it. You've got to sit there and there and there, but it happened, and it was good. Every member participation. People just wanted to be part of the movement. I didn't organize the groups, and I know it's not just this church, it's just people would organize that. It's a lay-led church, and the priest would be at the front, but the laity are organizing it and running and moving to the extent that you sometimes don't know what's going on. Does that happen here? Does that happen here?
Every Sunday.
But another thing that I really learned is that the hope, I think it was Maltman who wrote about the hope of the poor is the church. And it's absolutely true. This community that stays with you from birth through to death and beyond, that's very important. Beyond, I think, is part of the worldview there of what's happening afterwards. This was hope. And this was when everything else wasn't going right, like during the wars, when all the men were leaving to find other work elsewhere, or because the poverty was getting too much. Church provided hope. It just maintained the bonds of relationship in the communities, and it was just so strong. And once you were an Anglican or any member of the church, Mark explained to you last week that the Portuguese government had restricted the different churches to certain areas, the different denominations to certain areas. So basically, if you were on the lakeshore, you were an Anglican, and that meant 20,000 people were automatically, considering themselves that part of that church. If you went to another part, then it would be Baptist or whatever. There's been a lot of movement since peace in the last 20 years, but it's very, very strong. This is family.
Were the other denominations growing old? Were they thriving like the Anglican?
I think something was happening in the Anglican church specifically, but I do think there was movement of people and other churches, other denominations were growing. But something was happening in the Anglican church, and it was something that we were thinking about for a long while. Why us?
Yeah.
The priest used to tell me, I always ask him, why is this happening? I was told that our liturgy, especially our funeral liturgy, was beautiful. And when you're in a place of high death and mourning, the liturgy was just, it was great. And the fact that it's in a book, led by somebody who seems to know what they're doing, you know, it just added dignity to that. And other churches didn't have that. There was even a mission group there, a very Pentecostal mission. They came, one of the women came to me one day and she said, we've had a vision. Oh. And we've heard that renewal is going to come to northern Mozambique through the Anglican Church. I said, have you heard about some of the growth we've had? And this was really high charismatic, is there such a thing? Church telling us that this was happening, but it's true. There were people moving in, they came back, it was a people movement coming back from Malawi. You know, we mentioned James Tenga, I think in the first, is that him? Yeah. Who's now over here in Suwani, and he was our neighbour, and it was just interesting because
9 hours away.
but he was our neighbouring bishop, very supportive and a great friend, and you know, he was the one who introduced St Agnes for us into our diocese because it was so strong in Malawi. When all the refugees were in Malawi, the Anglican Church was extremely strong at serving the refugees in the camps there. And many years ago, 1996, I remember a meeting with the Mothers Union, and I was the only one there speaking English but translating things into Portuguese, you see. And we had a group of women from around the entire diocese that had come together to hear someone who was visiting from South Africa. And she was talking about all these different issues in South Africa, and it had to be translated 3 or 4 languages, so I'm sort of in the middle of it, you know, English to Portuguese, and then through to Nyanja, and all these other things. And that was interesting. But there was a woman there that we had to put even more interpretation in because she spoke some really, nobody really knew, so it was difficult to translate it. But she had come back from a refugee camp, so we were asking, well, what is the Mothers Union doing where you are? This is on one of the border towns coming over from Malawi. And she said, oh, well, the Mothers Union goes and helps people when they're giving birth, when they're sick, we go and work in their fields, when their children are born, we're there, when somebody dies, we're there. And I said, where did you learn that that's what you do as the mother, because that is what the Mothers Union do. Where did you learn that? We learned that in Malawi. It's what you do. It's what you do. You build community. You are part of the community. And that was something good that came out of terrible situation of refugee camps. A new way of doing things was seen. And the church in Malawi is extremely active. And there's a long history behind that too. But again, a similar sort of churchmanship because it was the same missionaries that went there.
In 1984, I made, 1994, so 2 years after the war had ended, most of the refugees were just coming back because they wanted to make sure that peace had come to the country. And I made a trip with a deacon. I was the director of development for the diocese, across the diocese to visit communities. And we came to one of these, the province bordering Malawi. And we found 6 congregations that had been planted because of the work of these women in the refugee camps. And when I interviewed them to say, well, you know, why have you become an Episcopalian? Anglican area. Why? And they said, when we were destitute, these women shared their clothing, their seeds with us, gave us part of their gardens to cultivate, and they helped bury our dead. And that made such an impact on these women that when they went to Mozambique, back to Mozambique, they wanted to bring the church with them. And so they planted these 6 congregations. Because of the love of the women in this place, these 6 congregations were started. 12 years later, when I visited there as a bishop, there were 126 churches. in that province of Zambezia all started by these women sharing the love of Christ, crying. They got on their knees. They said, "You've got to confirm this." And I said, "Guys, listen, you told me the problem was our children had not been given the faith of their ancestors, and so after confirmation, they left. They went through confirmation, and then they were gone. We never saw them again until they came with their babies to be baptized." That's what you told me. And you wanted a program that would help entrench the faith in them so that that didn't happen. Isn't that what you told me? Yes. I said, this is the program. And we have to stick together. I need your help. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult for me to continue to go visit these communities. If you don't stand up with me tomorrow in church. So they agreed. It was a very somber service. That was the least singing and joyful service I think ever had in 13 years there. It was very painful. But the word got out that you had to do this. And it started to change. And people really invested time and effort in training our young people, because in general young people with confirmation class. And it started to pay off dividends as these young people really got excited about the Christian faith. Stuck it out in church and started to get involved in leadership roles. The other.
Yeah, he has to leave me to talk about these young folk, because they're the community priests, and that's what my studies are bringing me. I'm writing about them. Exactly this group, because this was taken in this final workshop that I did with them. Because of this growth, and well, not even because of that, we started off with so few priests. When we went there, back there in 2003, to be honest, I thought, I know they haven't had very good training down in Maputo. I know that, for lack of resources. But maybe, we can find other courses they can go on to and all this sort of stuff. No, because the course they'd done in Maputo, they didn't have any certification for. So there was no proof of anything that they'd ever studied in the 3 years they'd been down there. So you can't send people elsewhere for further training. And then we found out that I think there was something like 21 priests available for 200, something like 240 congregations at this point. And it was very depressing actually going back. 21 priests, and about 7 of them were sick in some way, diabetes or alcoholism or different things. And then there were 7 that really, they maybe shouldn't have been ordained. And then there were 7 that were young enough and lively enough, but 7 for 200 and something congregations. So it was really necessary for us to get more clergy in for the type of church that you had there. Had to happen. And this had been done before in Malawi, again, as I said, and they suggested we did this, but we also took it from a guy called Roland Allen, who wrote about 100 years ago about trusting the Holy Spirit. If there is a community leader that is accepted as the community leader and has faith, ordain them and let them get on with it. I'm not the one ordaining them, that was him, but just so it was a bit of a risk, but about 25, I think, were trained as community priests, and at the moment there are 18 there, and these are some of them. Yes, there have been some utter failures amongst that, but the majority are actually doing amazing work with several congregations. 7 of these were in the last group that I was with, and one day I asked them, how many churches are you actually looking after? Because you see, a parish isn't one building, one church, it's several. And we worked out with 7 of these community priests, they were working with something like 36 congregations, which meant roughly 70 other catechists, lay readers, that they were training, And it's the only way we could do this was to multiply it out. You can't train 600 catechists, so you do it by multiplication. You train the ones to be trained, and then they train, and it goes out that way. And that was a key also to all the training that we did, whether it's in development or in this, in ministry.
Yeah, I'm just going to say, mission became the focus for our life as a diocese. And we didn't say at the beginning, but mission for us was community development work and a whole range of things that involves. It was advocacy, justice, and peace issues. Our country had gone through 26 years of war, there were tremendous tensions still. And it was evangelism, proclaiming the good news of Jesus Christ. In those three areas, that became the focus, and 75% of our budget was put into mission. 75% of our budget went for people outside the church, and only 25% was used for maintenance, administration, salaries inside the church, and that includes the stipends of clergy. Only 25%, 75% out. So it was by far our major emphasis was in reaching out.
What we learnt about mission, we learnt on the hoof, basically. And I do know there's just tons of stuff out there about mission and how we should all be in mission and missional churches and missional people and everything. And I'm not even going to read all this, but I just threw these all on here for you to know there's a lot of stuff that people are teaching about mission. But you have to put it into your context and what God is doing where you are. So I'm not going to read those. Some of these, I like this. Genuine mission vision is responsible for the Anglican communion. What's happening in the communion today, however you might understand it, will be held together by mission when we understand the other better, when we are actually in conversation with the other, the Anglican communion. And they say, this specific person was saying, that's what built the Anglican communion. Do you know, I thought for a long time it isn't just that so many missionaries went out. That doesn't account for the huge growth in the continent of Africa of our church. It doesn't account for it. So I put it down to normal people, the mums and dads, teaching their kids, taking them for baptism, and that's what grew the church. It's a normal people. It's a whole, yeah. But that's how the Anglican communion was grown. Gandhi, who's not a Christian, wasn't a Christian, he said to us to live in mission, live like Jesus, practice your religion, love and learn. That's someone outside of Christianity is telling the Christian church what mission was. Those four simple things. This one down here, mission isn't kindness to the lucky, kindness of the lucky to the unlucky. It's mutual, united obedience to the one God whose mission it is. Mark's already said that. Mission is God's mission and holding that. But mission isn't the kindness of the lucky to the unlucky. It's not just giving our money and getting someone else to do mission for us. It's that. And this was actually, when I was ordained deacon, I was ordained by Rowan Williams, and he knew that 2 months later an election was going to happen for us to possibly go back to Mozambique. No one else knew that in our little church in Wales, so he was being a bit like round back as he spoke. And he knew, because I was his World Church Mission Officer for the diocese, and he knew that we had a great group of people, different people involved in different aspects of mission that got together once a month with our bishop to discuss mission. It was brilliant. I loved it. It was just brilliant. You're sitting with one of the brains of the Anglican Communion talking about mission, with someone who did mission to the deaf, someone who was planting a church, me that was trying to get churches involved in world mission. It was just wonderful. Then he came to ordain me, and he was talking about mission, and this was in my heart, and the rest of the world is. But Helen, never forget this: God is in mission to you as well, and that has never left. Mission isn't just to others, because it's God's mission. He's in mission to us. He wants us to know Jesus, us to grow, and to pass it. It's a two-way thing. It's not just me doing it for others. And bells, I found this quite recently. You find these jazzy little things, and so it's he's put this. Basically, we have to. it's written on there. What does it stand for? It's very straightforward, but I'm just learning this just now. Where's the... Okay, he said to bless, to eat with others, to listen to the Spirit, to learn Jesus, not learn from Jesus, but learn Jesus, be Jesus, and recognize yourself as sent. Because that's what mission is. You're sent. You're not just you're sent, and that would give you the confidence. So bells. But
the only way this could work was through small groups. We had congregations of hundreds, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, 1,500 sometimes. That size of a community can't know each other or work together well. So small groups became critical in everything we did, these small Christian communities. And they also became instruments of mission, because not only did they meet together to study the Bible, that was sort of the reason they came together, in their own neighborhoods, their own localities, but they also went out and did something. It wasn't a project proposal. There was no grants or writing up of things. It was just doing something in their community as Christians. It might be helping an elderly person down the road. They didn't have to shovel driveways, but hoe the garden so that she had some vegetables. Mending. A group went and picked up the rubbish, all the junk on the street. It wasn't their job, it was everybody's junk, but they did it, and people saw it. Just little things like that. Each one did their own, it wasn't coordinated. But we said these were the building blocks of making church. The actual, what do we call it? Bricks. We call them bricks. In American English, bricks. She's confused me so much about English. These little bricks that, when put together, make a wall and a church. But each brick is critical. And these were the little bricks of making church. Meeting together around Scripture, in prayer, and then going out. And you could know each other in these smaller groups. You knew what was going on and make a big difference. And then in our community transformation development program, all these things were trial and error and mistakes and 2 steps forward and 3 steps back kind of things. We came across this process of working in community not as wealthy donors, even though we got access to funding, but more as salt and light and yeast in the midst of the community, so that transformation and development started to happen from within. It was slower to begin with, but it was sustainable, because the change happened because people themselves made it happen. And so instead of identifying problems and trying to solve them, we asked for 3 good things. One of the early trips, I used to get lists of bishop. Please, can you give us a piano, a keyboard, so our choir can sing? Bishop, we need roof sheets for our church. And I was getting really depressed because I didn't have any money, and I didn't know where I was going to get it to do all these things with hundreds and hundreds of churches all asking for 10 things. And so next time we were talking in one of our rides, I said, I'm going to try something. I said, before you give me the list, tell me 3 good things. Silence. They just all looked at their shoes, or not, as the case may be. And I said, I'm not leaving until I hear 3 good things, and I won't take your list with me. So finally, some youngster would stand up and say, we have a really good choir, and when they sing, our whole church just rocks. Hallelujah. One more good thing. And you could see the change happen in the faces of people as they started to name the things that God was already doing right now, right here in our midst, and say thank you for them. It was like a little prayer was being offered up. And the faces changed. And all of a sudden, we're doing something here. There's still a lot of hard work to do, and there's still a great many challenges. But something good is happening here. Praise God. What more could we do? So it was starting with the good and then dreaming about the better. And it just changed everything. And people started to come up with imaginative, creative, dynamic ways to transform their own communities that we could have never done from outside with a prescription. One size fits all. And amazing things started to happen. Go.
So mobilizing communities was part of the program then, and I'm just pointing out this poster, which was pointing towards our cathedral, and it says, welcome to, and that should all be written in Portuguese, okay, so they're using English. Welcome to the Happy Bar here, which is behind here, it's a bar, and then you've got the church here, the health centre, and then you've got the football club also got involved with that. Just to quickly say, so to think about mission, everyone has a memory of what things were like. And you have to work with that, but you also have to help people also to start thinking of both the present and the future. That was the picture on their right there is the picture of the cathedral. Can you see what I said? If you're sitting at the back, which is where the women sit who have got nursing babies, you can't hear a thing from the front. You can just about see it, and if there's smoke around, then you can see that. But yeah. So we're right through. There's just different perspectives that people have and how people are actually understanding what we're doing in church. You might think that they're with you, but they may not be. They may be actually understanding it quite differently. And then we saw what was happening amongst our clergy and some of the key leaders of the communities was actually, we were moving forward together because that's what you do in community. You're going forward and they're trusting the leaders in that. But we saw people actually changed by that. Remember what I just said about God in mission to us as well. We have seen priests changed by moving in that way. And I never saw it as a solid move forward. It was always backwards and forwards. It was like moving across a river on those wobbly stones. You know, we know where we want to go, but we're not dead sure about it. And we might fall in. But that guy on the right there, servant leadership, I could never have imagined that we would entitle a picture of him as servant leader 10 years ago, seriously, as a priest that has changed. He had to be moved all the time because he was falling out with people. He was angry, but something changed him. And yes, it's chaotic, and you can tell by the pace of our talking, it was chaotic as well. There were all sorts of different things going on, and everyone wanted to join in, and everyone excited, and building, and there's the women there, and all sorts. And these are basically what we documented whilst we were there, of the numbers that changed. So in members, we think it was roughly 34,000 when we went there, and we know that it was 65,000 when we left, or right now. Churches, well, I said earlier maybe 220, but we discovered that actually maybe the priests hadn't quite counted it. So 159, but it's now 442. Clergy went from that to 61 now. Adeptus are the people who are leading the voluntary groups in development and advocacy work, and they went from 2 to 49. And then the Mothers Union. And actually last year the women told me that there was now 3,700 members. It was a movement of women serving their communities. And basically, I don't know whether we should have told you the numbers to begin with, or at the end, or if we should have told you at all, or if it's intimidating, or yeah. But that's what a people movement was. And all we could really think in the end is what we think mission is joining in with what God's doing in our own unique way to God's glory.
And since we're in Lent, we won't say Alleluia.
So we thought we would send you, I've got these little pieces of paper just for you to take home and go through some of these thoughts in your own minds, because next week we wanted to kind of bring it all together. We will show you some more things of Mozambique, pictures, but to maybe just leave with you some of these questions and to think about for your own communities. Now, some of these you can even think, well, what does she mean by community? Does she mean the church, or does she mean the community or outside? That's for you to say and decide. What is God doing in you? Now, we mean personally. What is God doing in you? What is God doing in your community? What are the signs of the kingdom? If that's a bit complicated to think about, think what the medieval mystics used to say about what is good and true and beautiful where you are. And that is the presence of God. How can we join in where we are? Just those 4 questions, but if you want to take a little chitty bit of paper home with you, you can pass them around. Just to remind you of that. If you would like to pass on during the week some ideas, then that would be lovely, so we can think about how we can move forward next week. Otherwise, just bring some ideas next week. Anything you've heard that you feel like maybe would be appropriate here, or rang bells here, or in the ooh, or you felt, I loved your sermon the other week, and ooh, This is a sort of What has been a for you? That you thought maybe that could be something that could be introduced here, or brings something for here. And then Mark next week also will talk about some other ideas that he's been having as he's been moving around just in these last couple of months with different churches, about maybe what he could be doing to support mission in this diocese. But he just would like we would like some feedback on what you think about what has happened in another part of the world and how that might touch him. Does anyone want to say anything now? Otherwise, that's it. Are there any questions about anything that's been said tonight?
I'm sorry I missed last week, and so I probably you might have touched on this, but I know that Mozambique is predominantly a Catholic country. How was the mission work that you did? I mean, was there anything comparable going on within the Catholic Church in Mozambique in the years you were there?
It's interesting because the Roman Catholic Church was the Church of power, the established church, and had the resources, the numbers. It still is by far the largest Christian denomination, without question. And we had a very good relationship with the Roman Catholic Church over its history because of this kind of high church tradition. It was an easy fit. So we had a strong relationship. But because we were the church on the margins, we had to do things differently. We had very few financial resources. When I became bishop, the bank balance was $1,249 for the diocese. That's it. And the diocese paid the clergy. Wow. 19 who weren't going to get paid that month. So we had very few financial resources. Because of the model of the way we worked, we had very few human resources, paid people who were in staff positions. And so we had to come up with alternative ways of being church by necessity that perhaps the Roman Catholic Church didn't need to do. Because although it's been changing, I know when I left, I met with Bishop Mashinga, and he was interested to hear about our 7T stewardship program, because Catholic parishes were also now looking for ways to raise income to support their priests, because the financial situation was hitting everyone. So there was a change going on, but I think it was being on the margins made us have to react in a different way, which is quite unique, because in most of our neighboring countries where Britain had been the colonial power. The Anglican Church was the church of power and prestige and the elite. It wasn't that case in Mozambique, so we were in a bit different of a situation as a starting point.
Thank you.